Wouldn't it be good if by changing your words and putting positive vocabulary to use, you could change your life? Well, that's what this video is about. Have you ever found yourself thinking any of the following? I wish I could do that. I'm rubbish at this. I'm useless. I'm fat and I can't. The list is ongoing and endless. According to the National Science Foundation, 80% of our thinking is negative and 95% of our thoughts are repetitive. And what's scary about that is that it's really hard to move on when your mind is pulling you back. There's a saying that you become what you think about most of the time. And if your thinking is negative and damaging, it's surely going to hold you back. But all is not lost, because you can turn your thinking around and you can change your life around as well. Stick around, because I'm going to be sharing some techniques later that I've personally used that have helped me. It's one of life's mysteries as to how we believe it when we think negatively of ourselves and say I wouldn't be able to, and yet we can't believe ourselves when we tell ourselves I can. We're all born with no skills, no attitudes, no negativity. We all start in the same place. And if we all start in the same place, who's to say where you can end up? One of the things we all seem to forget is that we've made it to today. And in doing so, we've been successful getting through each and every day. And along the way, we've achieved so many things that we don't give any credence to. We only seem to think about the things we do wrong and what's wrong about us. And yet along the way, little by little, good things have happened to us. And we've stretched ourselves one step at a time and achieved something that didn't seem so big. But if you just take the time to look at those little achievements, you can see the big strides you've made over time. It's a bit like when you're learning to drive. Do you remember all the mistakes you made in the beginning? How everything you did had to be learned one thing at a time, and how you made silly mistakes that you corrected one at a time. And then one day you're ready to take the test. Maybe you didn't pass the first time, second or third or even more. But in the end you did. And after a period of time you're getting in the car and going someplace, and you don't even think about all those little steps that you need to do on the journey. Think back to day one and what your goal was. Remember that day you passed, how happy you were? Well, that was just the start. You really learn to drive once you're on the road on your own and you've got to make each decision. After a while, you start thinking about them and they become the norm. They become muscle memory. What about learning to cook and that sense of achievement the first time you made a meal that was edible? Now you don't give it a second thought. That's just two examples of successes. How many hundreds or even thousands of things have you succeeded at that you don't even think about? And yet it just takes one wrong thing and you're back to telling yourself how useless you are. So how do we flip that switch so that we begin to recognise that we're actually better than we thought we are? I love what Mel Robbins says in one of her videos about this very subject. She started off by talking about speaking kindly to yourself. Start being your own coach. It's about being kind to yourself and then starting to look forward to the things that you want to have or become, and then letting yourself know why. She then goes on to talk about some of the steps you need to take. I really recommend that you go and watch that video and see what she says. I'll leave a link to it down in the description. Many years ago, a mentor of mine, Kevin Dodge, used to tell me about faking it till you make it. He talked about the use of good self-talk and how it could help you erase the bad self-talk by replacing it with statements that could help you to move on. He also talked about starting now and acting like the kind of person you'd like to become. It became something I consciously worked on, catching myself each time I thought something disparaging about myself, and then consciously changing it to something more positive. I'd remind myself of something I'd been successful doing and then added some self-talk to further enhance that feeling. Getting into the habit of catching yourself each time you run yourself down takes time and work, but the sheer act of doing it can be a major part in turning things around. Your mind can be divided into two parts, the conscious and the subconscious mind. Think of it as an iceberg. The stuff you tell yourself comes into your conscious mind, the top bit, but moves down into the subconscious, which is, by the way, a much bigger part of your mind. And the thing about the subconscious mind is that it's rather like a sponge. It will believe everything you tell it, even if it's a lie. When you've thought negative things about yourself with the strength of feeling, it's started to believe it. And if you tell yourself it with passion, it's going to ingrain itself. But it doesn't have to stay that way. Let me give you an example. If you're old enough to remember the cassette tape and how it worked, when you bought a new one, it was blank, just like our minds when we were born. As you record onto it, you start to fill it, as we do with our minds. Now, if you record negative thoughts onto it, it will get full of negative, and each time you play it, you'll keep hearing those same things. So much so that if you hear them enough, you'll be able to repeat them word for word in the order you've heard them, and it will become the norm. But the good thing is that if you record positive things onto the tape until it's full, you'll have erased the negative, even though you can still remember it. However, if you listen to the positive things enough, you'll start to forget what was on the tape before bit by bit, and then you'll start to remember the new stuff. And eventually, you'll remember that word for word in the order you've heard it. It sounds simplistic, but that's what happens. And if it's injected into your subconscious with feeling, that's how you'll end up. So what you're doing is faking it until you make it. Now, I'm no psychologist and I've got no diplomas, but I found this helped me change my feeling about who I was. I was recommended a book called What to Say When You Talk to Yourself by Shad Helmstetter, which I bought and started to use it as a blueprint for what to do. On the first reading, I was really cynical about it, as it just seemed so easy. But I read it again and I thought, why not give it a go? What did I have to lose? I started using self-talk to help me when I was at my lowest ebb. It took a while to start to believe it, because at the time I'd lost pretty much everything I'd worked for since I'd started working for myself 10 years earlier. There were some easy techniques the book recommended, and so I started using them. The first was silent self-talk, which basically was anything I thought about myself and what I was doing. I'd listen to myself, and as often as I noticed myself thinking negatively about me, I'd stop, turn it around, and rephrase it in a positive way. For example, if I thought I really can't do this, I'd stop and think to myself, actually, I'm really good at overcoming things, and this I can do. And then I'd try and do it each time I noticed. Now, don't get me wrong, for a long time I'd also be thinking to myself, who are you kidding? But I persisted, and gradually my thinking started to change. Next was self-speak, where I'd say it aloud when I was on my own. As I was doing something, I'd say things to myself like, I'm confident, I'm charismatic, I'm excited, and I'm enthusiastic. And over time, I'd add other sentences to my self-speak. I started to blot out the negative and overwhelm it with positive things like, I'm a visionary and see things as they can be, not as they are. So that even though I was telling myself I was confident and charismatic, I was also saying that was my now and my future would be even better. I then started on the next technique from the book, self-conversation. I'd already been doing it for years, telling myself I was rubbish at things and agreeing with myself. So I started flipping it. I'd be looking at myself in the mirror as I was washing, saying, James, you're looking good this morning. And then I'd answer myself saying, I know, and what's more, I'm feeling great too. I reckon it's going to be a brilliant day. At first, it felt stupid. And yet it never felt stupid when I had the same conversation negatively. So I just carried on. The next stage was self-write. In those days, we had 3x5-inch cards, and I'd write a statement on the card and another on the other side. And I'd carry around 6 of those cards with 12 self-talk phrases on them. And during the day, I'd pull them out of my pocket, perhaps 4 or 5 times, and read them to myself. And then I'd add new sayings to the cards and swap the cards around. I followed all these techniques from the book, and over a period of time, I could feel myself becoming more positive. But the thing that made the most difference was the next stage, tape talk. Here's where I took all those sayings that I'd been writing on cards and recorded them onto a cassette and was listening back to them in my car when I was out and about. Now this one felt really silly. It was the one I least wanted to do. I first read about doing it in 1993. I didn't, however, do it for at least a year. But do you know what? I've been doing it ever since. These days, there's a file on my phone that is about 20 minutes long with self-talk statements like those I first wrote on the cards all those years ago. It's still part of my armoury today. I don't listen every day anymore, but I listen perhaps 3 or 4 times a week. Has doing all these things turned me into Mr. Positive? Well, let's put it this way. I've gone from being someone who hated myself and constantly berating myself for being useless, to someone who now feels at home in his own skin and is happy with the man that I'm becoming. And I say that because I believe it's an ongoing process, and I never want to get to the stage where I think I'm the best I can be. I always want to feel I can do better, not so that I can be better than someone else, but that I can be a better me. As for the book, I must have read it 20 times over the years. Now, am I positive every hour of every day, having read it so often and followed the steps I've just talked about? No, I'm human, just like everybody else, and yes, I still have bad days. But I've learned techniques that have helped me to get back to feeling how I want to be much quicker than I'd have ever been able to had I not listened to Kevin Dodge all those years ago and read that book and faked it till I made it. I'll also leave a link in the description down below in case you'd like to check that book out as well. If I've said anything that seems to make sense to you, feel free to leave a comment down below. And let me know if you've used self-talk before to help you overcome a situation. As I said earlier, I'm no psychologist, I'm just an ordinary guy who's took on board some information, given it a try and put it to good use. It's worked for me. So who's to say it can't work for you? After all, what do you have to lose by trying something a bit different? And if you click out there, I'll be asking, why not live the life you love instead of the life you have? I'll see you next time.